Welcome to the Ashleie Elaine podcast, where soul meets strategy, spirit meets systems, and healing becomes your legacy. This is a space for visionaries, healers, builders, my cycle breakers, and leaders who know they're here to create more than just ideas. They're here to build something that will last. We talk about all things from spirituality to healing, public health to birthing your soul purpose. So, whether you're birthing a program, intervention, a business, reimagining your current work, or reclaiming your whole life's rhythm, you are in the right place. Let's begin. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Ashleie Elaine podcast. My name is Love Ashleie Elaine, and I am your spiritual guide, your favorite pink sheep, all of the things. This is probably going to be my favorite series that I'm starting, and who knows how long it will be, because I love storytelling. I love how powerful the medicine is that comes from telling our own stories, telling the stories of the land that we live on, that we come from, and what healing and embodiment looks like, because a lot of our stories live in our body. We can't escape the ancestral wisdom that comes from that. So gather your things, get your coffee, get your tea, get comfy, and let's dive in. Your story isn't a period. There's no period at any point in your story. Unless you allow there to be one, there is a comma everywhere. What happened to you is real. What happened to your ancestors is real, but it isn't where your story ends or where your ancestors' stories end. Just because they are no longer here in the physical realm with us does not mean that their story has ended. Their stories are the reason why we have one today. This episode, we are going to tap into three different things: how we get stuck in what was and what should have been in our own personal stories, and how that can translate into our stories with our family, our lineage, all of those things. Two, the power of narrative and how we choose or don't choose to shift it and live in it. And then three, what rewriting your story as ongoing looks like. It's very easy for us to get stuck in what we should have done different, what we could have done different, how things should be. But we all know that that doesn't really do anything for us, right? We have to allow whatever is unfolding to unfold. Because here's the thing: when we put a period at any point of our story, we are telling God that there's nothing left for him to do. We are telling ourselves and signaling our nervous system, we're signaling our energy, we're signaling our frequency, like we're sending out the frequency that there's nothing left for me, that there's nothing else for me to do, there's nothing else that I should be receiving, there's nothing else that I should be giving. We cut our own lives short, which then does something to our energy, which then does something to our thinking pattern, which then does something to our brain functioning, which then does something to our bodies, because what we believe is how we live. So if you are constantly walking around holding on to what has been and still trying to figure out what it's supposed to be, how it should have been, and trying to recreate that, I need you to take a deep breath, exhale, and pause, because that is getting you nowhere but stuck. that is getting you nowhere but stuck. Yes, there's going to be moments where we have to tap backwards to kind of look at, okay, how did we get to where we are today? Because real talk, the decisions that we make today set us up for how life is lived tomorrow. And that's not necessarily that anything, like all the bad things that happened are what set us up. It's how we responded to those things. It's how we moved through, keyword through, those situations and those moments and those, I'm using air quotes, those bad things. There's never going to be a moment in life where we are not going to go through and have to endure something. That is part of life, right? I used to always like tell my son that it's okay to cry because God gave us tear ducts because he knew this life was not going to be joy all the time. There's joy and sorrow. So we have to learn how to hold both of those. And what we do with our story, how we tell it, is always going to be important because that gives us, one, the freedom to break away from that narrative that we've been living in or holding in or have adapted to. And two, allows us to take a nice, beautiful look at where we are and become the conqueror of that narrative and create a new one, right? You get to create a new narrative for yourself. So if we stay stuck in what was, and if we stay stuck in what should have been, we lose the opportunity to create again. We lose the opportunity to try again. We lose the opportunity to look at, well, what is the other side of that story that I've just lived through that I can bring joy, that can remind me of the joy? Because one of the joys is being grateful that I woke up today after living that story and can do something different, right? Can look at how strong I've become, can look at how strong my ancestors were with their stories, right? We always forget that our ancestors also had a story. And unfortunately, the way this current administration is set up with their own stories and narratives and what they want to hold on to, those stories are trying to get stripped. But we are here to hold those narratives, to hold those stories, and to embody them in a way that is going to bring healing to our lineage, to our land, to our culture, to this land, if you're in the US, to the world. Those stories that are trying to be erased are in our DNA. We can't escape them. We can't get rid of them. We can't remove them. No matter how hard someone tries, no matter how hard we try to erase certain things, it's in our DNA. When we talk about the power of narrative, what we don't choose what happens to us, but we choose how we hold it, right? A friend of mine, we were working on her business well, not a few years ago, like years ago. And instead of the word victim, she used the word victor. And at that point in time, I had never heard someone talk about being a victor over their circumstances, over, sexual abuse and rape and the abuse that has happened to a person, to a culture. And that stuck with me because that shifts the narrative of how one, how you perceive yourself, and two, how you get through that situation. And I've said this before on this podcast when I would dedicate the October episodes to domestic violence, that at some point, for a short period of time, you have to allow yourself to identify as the victim of something, because that allows you to embody what has happened so you don't allow what has happened to stay trapped. When you embody it, you give yourself permission to feel it, to hold it, to release it. And sometimes we get stuck at the holding it and don't get to release it because there's nothing showing us that we are safe to let go of it. And that's where the narrative and the pattern and the identity comes from, right? Some people are still stuck in the identity of a victim. That's why we have all these healing modalities. We have therapy, we have yoga, we have a behavioral health system that still needs some healing itself, but it's there for us to be able to say, I am not okay with what has happened to me. I need help processing it. And that is not weakness. That is you taking the first step to saying, I want to change my narrative and how I hold this story of what has happened to me. You have the power, the autonomy, and the authority to choose how you hold the narrative of your story. You also have the power, the autonomy, and the authority to choose how long you hold on to that story and when you say yes to creating a new one. And then when we talk about rewriting our story, you're allowed to rewrite your story as many times as you want, honey. You're allowed to rewrite it as many times as you want. You're allowed to embody something new. The body is always going to remember, and that remembrance is not an attack. That remembrance is not harmful. That remembrance is not shameful. That remembrance is giving you the space to be able to remember, one, what you've already lived through, two, what programming needs to be shifted, and three, what you don't want to live in anymore. And I think that's the biggest one that we forget, right? When you're on your healing journey, there's going to be moments where certain things pop up again, and we always run to shame. We always run to, oh, I thought I was over that. But it's the body remembering all these moments of abandonment, all these moments of pain, all these moments of scarcity, all these moments of unsafety. When it pops up, I did an episode on triggers last year. This is 2026, 2025. When it pops up, it's not meant to harm you or jolt you into shame or saying, "Oh, I thought I was over this." It just means that you're in a space now where you're healthy enough to now heal this part. And it's not going to need a whole year for you to heal. It's not going to need a whole slew of things because your body is your body is remembering what once was, and it's tailoring it to what you are integrating. We don't talk about integration enough because that is the hardest part of it all. To get to a new narrative, integration has to happen. That's where we're like when we're talking about this is getting a little spiritually woo-woo. But when we're talking about new timelines, we're talking about integration. So rest is part of that integration. Eating clean is part of that integration. Connecting with nature, going outside, moving your body is part of the integration, right? I read something one time, an astrologer that I really, really like. And it was talking about you got to trick your own self, right? But the only way you're able to trick your own self, which is rewriting a narrative, when you're rewriting a narrative and rewriting your story, that means you're rewriting patterns. It always starts at patterns. So there may be some patterns that we've picked up from family that created a narrative. And the only way that we recreate a new narrative is identifying that this pattern no longer works for me. This pattern does not align with who I believe I am. So you got to trick your brain. You have to trick yourself. You have to like give yourself the oop de whoop to be like, "Oh, wait, what just happened?" And I started doing that, right? Like, so when I would go for a walk, there was this one way I would always walk. I would do it. It was a pattern. It was a pattern. And one day I was like, what if I trick myself and just go a completely different way? And I did that. And it confused me for a minute, but I noticed what it was doing to my brain. It was like, oh, she's ready for a new pattern. She's ready for something different. No one can tell you when you're ready for something different. You just have to trick yourself into doing something different. You have to trick your brain. You have to trick your nervous system. You have to trick your entire being and your energetic frequency into doing something different. This is where you know your story. There are so many times where we have a lot, like our stories have just happened to us and we have no clue, no idea what has happened. In my book, Married to Trauma, that's basically what I'm talking about is not even knowing that certain things that happened to me in my life were happening until something else happened. And I was just like, wait, what is happening? And then I started seeking therapies for myself and was ready to release it. There's too many stories that we have, too many narratives that we're holding that we don't know where how we adopted them or how we got them or how they became our day to day, right? Because the stories are created daily, right? When we talk about becoming a writer and wanting to write a book or doing anything that requires time and commitment, that's a daily practice. The story that you are living right now came from a daily practice. Mm. The narrative that you are living in right now came from a daily practice. So, this is why the power and presence of being so fully engrossed into the now is so important because the awareness of what you're creating now, right? Your thoughts, your energy field, your movements, your responses, your behaviors. The life you are living now came from a daily practice of pattern setting. What narrative are you living in now? And can you look at the last week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months of how you got to that narrative today in this present moment? Can you say that the being that you are, the narrative that you are living, the story that you are writing in this present moment, you are satisfied with? Take a nice big inhale and exhale. The joy is there's no period in your story unless you put it there. There's always a comma. There's always a comma. I've been like not studying improv, but I've been getting into comedy a lot more. It's so much fun. And I almost like I've been listening to a lot of comedians talk about their art of comedy and um just when they would do improv and like how they got to where they are, and it's that yes and, right? I think Quinta Brunson talks about that a lot, that yes and. Years ago, I like was started doing this like years ago. I love having these things that no one knows about me. That's so much fun. But I adopted that yes and instead of the but, right? I got rid of the but and it's yes and, right? Because two things can exist at once, that you are experiencing something so painful and you are going to rise above it. It is not. It's killing you, but it's killing you, and it's killing a version of you that you no longer need. Are you willing to let that narrative, that story, that version of you go? I say it often, the life that we desire, that we keep, and I'm using air quotes, only dreaming of, is on the other side of the narrative that we have to be willing to let go. The death of self. Some of us have been living in a narrative for so long that it's hard to release it. That is the death of self. What you want is on the other side of the death of self, the death of that narrative, the death of that story. That's it. That's the post. Can you, this is your homework, guys. Can you look at your story today? Be present in this moment. Can you look at your story today and say, I am proud of the steps that I've taken to get here, and I feel good about this story, this narrative that I'm writing? Or are you confused and trying to figure out how you got to where you are? Either way, there's no period, there's always a comma. I love you all so much for free. Tune in. This is going to be a really good series. Like I said, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's going to be more than like 4 episodes. Um because the power of storytelling is really, really beautiful. And if you're like a business owner or creating projects or anything of the sort, it also comes down to what that looks like in the narrative of what you're building, what you're creating, right? Because that has a story, that has a narrative. And then the people that you're servicing, that you're called to hold space for, the team, all of that, that has a story. Like they have a story and they have a narrative. So I'm starting out this series with our own personal stories, because that's where, when we can embody our own personal stories, we create more empathy and more space and more room for the stories of others, the stories of the land, the stories of history, the stories of um organizations. And like, stories are very, very powerful, and they are medicine. So I love you all for free. Tune in every week. I think I'm like considering changing these, dropping these on Mondays. Y'all bear with me. I feel like Friday is just like forever. Um, but we'll see. Right now it's Fridays. But tune in every week. I love all of you for free. Take care.